Aquí estamos. It's another week of Conchas y Café. I think this is now, week 6 that we're on, and our 5th lesson. Just to give you all a heads up, next week will be another lesson, and then the week after that, I'll be giving you all an opportunity to workshop. So you guys will have a chance to share the work that you've been working on up to this point, y así podemos compartir con los compañeros. Y luego la semana que sigue, de hoy en, ¿qué sería? De hoy en 15 o 21 días, sería el día de entrega. So our date to turn in your work for the zine will be in about 3 weeks from now. So I'll make sure to post that to Google Classroom so you guys all know the exact date and how I'll be requesting your work. And yeah, just want to obviously check in, see how everybody's doing. Anybody have any comments about last week's lesson or any questions that didn't go answered? No, nadie? All right. All I'm seeing is shaking heads, so sounds good. All right, entonces, to get us started with this week, let's go ahead and, got a couple more people joining us. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started with the quote of the week. So hopefully you can all see my screen right now. This week, I bring to you a quote from none other than Maya Angelou, who is an American poet and writer and a civil rights activist. She was born April 4th, 1928, and she passed away a few years ago, about 6 years ago now, on May 28th in 2014. Y Maya Angelou escribió, "Las palabras significan más que lo que se pone en el papel. Se necesita la voz humana para infundirlas con las matices profundas del sentido. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with shades of deeper meaning." Yeah, let Tina in here. So go back to the screen. Yeah, what do you guys think? How do you interpret what Maya Angelou has to say about our words?
I think like all of us who love going to open mics and poetry readings, that it's totally different than just seeing it on paper, especially when you hear the words out of the person writing it, like the poet. It changes definitely how we interpret it. It has richer meanings and flavors.
Flavors, I like that. Someone's hungry. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be said, right, about the way that something is delivered versus, just reading it on paper. That's why performance is important, ¿no? ¿Qué más piensan de lo que dice Maya Angelou? San Juanita? You're muted. You don't mind unmuting yourself?
I think that the voice is very important because it's actually what gives it meaning. And I mean, I totally agree with that. And I'm sure everybody agrees, because I have noticed that for example, I write something and I let one of my kids read it. They don't, it's not the same. When I read it, I don't know. I guess it has to do, sometimes they don't even get it. I guess they're just tuning me out or something. But when I read it to them, like I was reading something to my daughter and she didn't really, until I read it to her, I guess I don't know, just the way I read it, it makes, like I said, it just makes a difference. And especially if you're the one that wrote it and you're the one that reads it, because not everybody's going to have the same effect, I think. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely more to just the words that we see on the paper, right? All words have obviously the annotation. Right? La anotación de la palabra es lo que significa la palabra. It's the standard definition of a word. But then there's also the connotations, right? And the connotations are the implied meanings of a word. You might say, cat, for example, something as simple as a cat. But when we say cat in context with, the dark cat, dark, that word that modifies the noun of cat, dark might mean something different to everyone. It might make you think of a black cat. It might make you think of a cat that is, I don't know, speckled, like a tortoiseshell cat. It also might make you think of a cat that's evil, because darkness is usually associated with the idea of evil or being bad, or something like that. Which that in itself is kind of it sets up an expectation, and darkness is not necessarily equivalent to evil or anything like that. It's all just the connotations that have been assigned to it through history. But there's also, I think, another deeper meaning that Maya Angelou is talking about. Right? She calls it, the shades of deeper meaning. And it takes the human voice to infuse that, as she says, into the words. So, who could think of an example of how, your voice, the way you say something, might actually infuse a different meaning to a word? Has anybody ever experienced a time where someone said something in a way that the word by itself maybe didn't sound negative, but it maybe came across as negative? Anybody have an example of something like that? No one? I'm sure we've all experienced something like that. Abraham, I see you kind of giggling there. ¿Qué pasó? Or San Juanita?
It has happened a lot, especially, and I'm gonna be like when we have a group chat in my family,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and sometimes we write stuff, and one or two people get upset, and sometimes we just have to call each other. No, I didn't mean it like that. It's not.
Yeah.
So you have to put when you say it. I don't know, but it's like I said, that's when it's happened where the saying it, speaking it, made a big difference
Mm-hmm.
in the way that it was perceived,
Mm-hmm.
by other people. And so I have found that the written word by itself can be perceived differently than when you hear it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
I
totally. I mean, I'm thinking of like moments where, they call them now, they have a name. It's microaggressions, right? Microaggressions, for the people that don't know it or have never heard of that term, it's usually a moment where a person might say something in a sort of backhanded way, and then, they don't mean to say it in a way, or maybe they do mean to say it in a way that sounds kind of offensive, but it's the word it by itself is not. To say something like, "Oh, you speak so well," you might read that, "You speak so well," and a person might read it and interpret it as a sign of like a compliment, right? But when a person says it, "Oh, you speak so well," like as if they're surprised. It's that intonation that they use that gives it that different meaning. I know I've personally have had that said to me on a number of occasions. English is not my first language, it's Spanish. And for me to be able to articulate myself in a way that, sounds educated, quote unquote, for people, especially when I was in college, it was a surprise to see what I look like and to hear me speak in the way that I speak, right? So that, I think, is a good example of what Maya Angelou is telling us. Now, there's also, I think, the lack of. Oh, Judith, ¿tiene alguna pregunta?
Okay. Judy, le gustaría compartir algo.
Okay.
Cuando dijo que su primer lenguaje es español, se acordó de algo que pasó recientemente y es un buen ejemplo.
One time, I was talking to my mom's friends, and they gave us a dish to eat.
We're in a place, in a restaurant to eat.
And they gave it to me so I can pass it down, and I gave it to someone, and they said they how do I say it? That they didn't want it.
I said, no, Judy, you can keep it. Go ahead.
And I said, but I'm going
in Spanish. We were all talking in Spanish, and then she said, oh no, it's okay, you have it because ustedes ya van de salida. Y las tres señoras se ofendieron, se enojaron y me regañaron hasta a mí. So I know my daughter, so I know she didn't mean that way. It's like ustedes first because you're ladies or you're older, but in Spanish, you're going de salida. It's como like, ya, you know, ya vas de salida. So they were look at us like we're crazy and look at Judy and scold her. They were telling her things. And then I said, no, but she didn't mean it. And then like, yeah, she mean it. She mean it like that. Like, ya nos vamos a morir todas. Por eso coman ustedes. Dije, oh my God, no. Thank you.
Yeah, no, yeah. And I think that that's a good example, right? No fue la manera en que quería decir eso, pero se entendió de esa manera, right? Yeah, like Miss Luz wrote in the chat, you know, when texting, so much is lost or read between the lines. You know, that's a matter of interpretation, ¿verdad? Señora Maggie?
No, ya es que no se iba mi mensaje, pues es lo que quería decir, que cuando tú hablas toman acción las palabras, toman vida. Ya, lo siento, tengo muy mala recepción, por eso me saca y me vuelvo a meter, pero ya logré entrar. Gracias.
De nada. No, y sí es cierto. O sea, yo creo que eso es lo que quiere decir Maya Angelou con esta cita, ¿verdad? Que las palabras toman vida. Y no es que solo tomen vida, sino que también toman vidas múltiples, ¿verdad? No es un solo sentido en que existen. And yeah, what Tina wrote in the chat about, you know, her dad saying it's not what you say, it's the way you say it. That's also really important, right? Poetry itself is really about the performance of it. You know, it's not always just what we read, it's how we perform, ¿verdad? Y a veces la manera en que uno va presentar una palabra o una poesía, si uno lo hace con voz baja o con voz alta, if you're shouting versus whispering a line, you know, that's going to have a really big difference. It's going to make a huge difference in the way that people interpret what you're saying, you know, and even the way that it looks on the page is going to make a difference in how people interpret. Abraham?
That reminds me when I started messaging, because I had my first smartphone and I was texting with this friend of mine and she was telling me, why are you screaming at me? And I didn't get what she was saying. And then, oh shit, because you're writing all capitals. Like, oh, I didn't know that. I was just trying to figure out how to change them. So I just kept it on capitals.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that goes to like, you know, chat etiquette, email etiquette, right? Like if you respond in all caps, yeah, people are going to think you're angry or that you're, you know, shouting at them. Even though that's not the case. Yes, Tina?
It's just that it happens all the time when people are texting, and if they're not super close, like if they haven't talked to in a long time, there can be a lot of misunderstanding between, I mean, it could sound angrier than it actually is, and the other person there's this family situation, I don't want to get into it, but two people, not me, are having a conversation, even though they really do feel a lot of anger, but if one thing is just a little off, it sounds worse than it is. You know, and then the whole thing just escalated into a horrible words going back and forth because, you know, the person was trying to listen, but the other person was like, no, I've had it with you, blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, it can get because you don't know what the inflection is when you're just texting words.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important word for us to understand, right? Inflection. La manera en que uno pronuncia una palabra, that's the inflection. You know, our pronunciation can vary. Our voice is ultimately a tool, right? And guess what our theme is, right? It's our voice, our place. And so not only do we in poetry use things like anaphora, where we repeat words, or like we talked about last week with epizeuxis and creating words or repetitions of words that are like a chant. That's one way to perform. That's one way to express a message. But our voice, it's the actual performance, the way in which we present our work. That is a really big tool that we have that actually takes up space. Because ultimately, when we speak, sometimes, we might not be heard, but, in a poetic space, we are taking up space. ¿Verdad? Su voz es lo que ayuda no solo representar lo que uno es o lo que uno piensa que uno es, que está presentando, pero sino también uno está tomando lugar en el canon de literatura. Even if our poetry doesn't get published by, say, Random House or Penguin or, these large publishing companies that are the ones that establish the canon, the fact that we write and that we share our work, that is taking up space. And so our voice, the way in which we write, is in fact a form of taking up space. And on the paper, the way that you structure your poems, that also is a way of taking up space. Así que el poema de esta semana que les voy a presentar es un poema que experimenta un poco con esa idea de tomar lugar. If you had a chance to actually download the handout for this week, you'll see that the poem that we're reviewing today really does some unique things in the way that it takes up space. And so here, for those of you that didn't get a chance to see it yet, this is Woman in Dub by Desiree C. Bailey. And I translated, obviously, in Mujer en Dub. Dub, para los que no conocen, es un tipo de música, es un estilo de música que viene de Jamaica. It's kind of like a form of ska, reggae, dancehall reggae that is still pretty popular. It dates back to, I think, the 70s and 80s. But Desiree C. Bailey is the author of What Noise Against the Cane. And her book is the winner of the 2020 Yale Series of Younger Poets. So she's a relatively new poet. We have here a little preamble that starts off the poem for us. Aquí la cita que empieza el poema dice: me voy a poner una camisa de fierro y sacar el diablo de la tierra. In English, it's I'm gonna put on an iron shirt and chase the devil out of earth, by Lee Scratch Perry and Max Romeo. No quiero leer el poema entero. Quiero darle la oportunidad a alguien. So, real quick, do I have a volunteer that would like to read the poem for us? Is there anybody in the group that'd like to start us off either with the English or the Spanish? And I'll have you read side A first, and then we'll switch back and forth. Any volunteers? Anybody want to give it a shot?
I would like to read in Spanish.
Okay. Paola, entonces, aquí te voy a poner en la pantalla the Spanish, or at least the poem, I should say. So, here we go.
Lado A. El diablo que veo es el que vi y sacó con clavos los temores, fuera de ciclos de heridas, el pavor calcificándose en profecía. Me pongo una camisa de fierro para enfrentarlo y perseguirlo, pero el poli sigue borracho. Con poder me pongo una camisa de fierro, pero los hombres en la calle vigilan el pezón, acosando mi punani desde... Antes que derrame mi primera sangre, que amenaza de cuerpo. Lanzo culpa a la cáscara. ¿Será de verdad el diablo o será mi obra fantástica? La respuesta no es la cosa. El hecho de paranoia es la verdadera violencia. Guerra. La presencia actual de la pregunta. Quiero mirar hacia adentro. Tomar un buen vistazo al sistema de sonido. el latido de mi corazón resonando fuera de mi set folclórico. Mi creencia desesperada en las realidades alternativas. Un lado B, donde soy abolida de labor emocional, alias la carga de la mujer negra, libre para rendirme a mi propia locura, para hundirme dentro de su dub, despojada de primera voz, reverberando afuera del dolor de un cuerpo.
Perfecto. Thank you, Paola. Do I have any volunteers in English? Anybody want to read it in English one? Tina? All right. I'm going to switch over to presenting again so everybody can follow along. All right, go. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, side A. The devil I see is the one I saw and nail out of fears, out of circles of wound, dread, calcifying into prophecy. I put on an iron shirt to face it, chase it, but the cop still pissed drunk with power. I put on an iron shirt, but the men on the street surveilled the nipple, been hounding my Punani since before I spilled my first blood. What a menace of a body. I hurl blame to the husk. Is the devil real or is it of my fantastical making? The answer is not the matter. The fact of paranoia be the true violence. Warfare, the very presence of the question. I want to peer inward, to take a good look at the sound system, my heartbeat echoing out of my folkloric thirst, my desperate belief in other realities, a B-side where I'm abolished from emotional labor, aka Black woman's burden, free to surrender to my own madness, to sink down into the dub of it, stripped of my first voice, reverbing outside the pain of a body.
Excellent. Thank you, Tina. So that's not the entire poem, but I want to take a quick moment right here to pause. And I want to first make an observation. Both Paola and Tina read it a particular way. And I'm sure you noticed, right? In the poem itself, there are these pauses, these blank spaces where it looks like, the person might have written in, a couple of extra spaces using the space bar, right? La manera en que Paola y Tina lo leyeron fue la manera perfecta para hacerlo, right? So those are called Sejuras. And I'll give you the full definition of a Sejura. But that's exactly how you read them, right? You read them as pauses, as long pauses, depending on the length of the space. Now, there is a side B, right? So we had a side A, now there's a side B. Who would like to read for us the side B and give that one a shot? En español o en inglés? Any volunteers? Any takers? No one wants to volunteer? Come on, guys.
I can read in español.
Okay, so Carlos, and then Caro, you'll take care of the English. So Carlos, give me a second here to present the screen, get it ready for everyone. So aquí está. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Lado B. Despojada de mi primera voz. Abajo en el dub, poli acusando mi sangre. Hacia el paranoia, una realidad negra. Ciclos derramados. Poder descascarrillada. Yo mujer emocional. Yo fierro. Calle verdadera. Folclórico y loca. Verdadera. Toma un buen vistazo al diablo. mira hacia adentro del pavor. Hombres se rinden a la herida, borracho, calcificado, pero yo, fantástico, persiguiendo ecos, clavado al sistema, libre en sonido. Yo, un hecho. Respuesta de mi propia obra.
Perfect. Gracias, Carlos. All right. Now to hear it in the English performed. Caro, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Side B. Stripped of my first voice, down in the dub, cop hounds my blood into paranoia, a black reality, cycles spilled, power husked, emotional woman I iron, real street, folkloric and mad, true. Take a good look at the devil, peer into the dread. Men surrender to wound, drunk, calcified. But I, fantastic, chasing echoes, nailed to system, free in sound. I, a fact, answer of my own making.
Excellent. Thank you, Caro. Thank you, Carlos. So, what observations do you have about side B? How does side B read differently for you when compared to side A? ¿Cómo interpretan el poema? Carlos?
Yeah, it was even just like visually side B, because of all the spacing, it kind of gives it a feel of like there's some space there, like rain or detachment. Kind of adds another feel of maybe like falling apart, breaking. I guess depending on the poem. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this one when I was reading it, I don't know, I was thinking maybe because since the moment I read the quote, I think that's like a quote that it's used like in a Bob Marley song, right? I'm gonna put on an iron shirt and choose the devil out of the earth.
Yeah, it's a song. It's a quote from a song.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what I was like. I just couldn't take out the music from my head, I guess. Yeah, pero es como lado A es como más un poquito, o sea, sí hay espacios, pero como que de todos modos, como que se lee un poquito más como lineal, y el lado B está más desprendido y no sé, creo que es como que da más pausas más largas y todo eso, aunque en el lado A parece, porque estamos acostumbrados a ver como los paragraphs todos como juntos, sin espacios así. Y como que sí te da un sentir así como de que está un poquito roto, y después el lado B, por tantos espacios, te da este sentir de que está ya como muy, muy roto.
Yeah, I like how you're phrasing that, how, side A feels kind of broken, but still structured. Yeah, like Abraham said, lado B, side B, está rayado, right? So there's a skipping, there's definitely a much more of a sense of falling apart. But at the same time, is it really falling apart? Or is there something else happening? I mean, think about what the words are saying.
I mean, it's skipping a couple of times, like one of the phrases that it has like that part, but also it makes you think of each sentence a little more deeply because you have more time to think about them. So it kind of raises them up a little bit more than just reading them together. That's the big difference on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that extra space, kind of like how Carlos and Abraham both pointed out, it gives you a sense of pause, and it also gives you time to reflect on what you just read. Whereas the other one, we're so used to reading in paragraph form, like Carlos was saying, that, reading in paragraph form and prose, sometimes we might skip over things, or we might sort of just forget what was just said. In the performance of it, though, right? Cuando se le presta la voz humana, ¿qué son las emociones que salen? Yeah? You have a comment, Ibra? Oh, Karen, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I feel like definitely on this beside B, I feel like it almost forces you into a musical kind of way of reading it. And I guess it makes me think of a couple of things. It makes me think of a record skipping, and it also makes me think of a blackout poem. Like I almost feel like it's a blackout poem of the side A.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good observation. Caro?
Yeah, well, I was just rereading the poem, and then I noticed, like, at the very end of side A, the speaker says a B-side where I'm abolished from emotional labor, aka Black woman's burden. And then that's kind of what happens in like side B. And like, they also talk about like stripping of the voice, and that's how side B starts, like stripped of my first voice. So it's like this side B is not really necessarily like a breaking down, but maybe like a freedom. It's like a breaking free, not like a breaking down. And so it's like the space, like taking up space. I guess it's something like from like a as Black women, a lot of Black women don't get to take up space, and so this is like her sort of reclaiming that in side B.
That's exactly my thoughts too. The fact that you have side A so compressed, right, in basically one paragraph, or one long continuous sentence. There's a confinement there. And there is that wanting to break out, by using the spaces in between some of those words. But once you get to side B, it's like our poet has become free, right? Abolished of the emotional labor of being a Black woman, as they phrase it. And they really do start to really take up space in the poem, but not just the poem, the actual page too, right? If you printed it out, you'll see that it's 3 pages long. It's a really long poem if you look at it from a print point of view. And that use of white space, of that blank space, not only is it giving you time to pause and reflect on what you just read, it's also giving you a chance to as the poet at least, take up a space that you might not normally be given. And I think that, Caro's very right in saying that, Black women specifically in the United States are rarely given a space to be acknowledged as anything other than an object, to be viewed or to be dominated, right? It's as if going to the meat of the matter, Tina says, right? And I think that that's a very, very powerful tool that you have as poets. The absence of voice is not necessarily meaning that you do not have a voice, right? The absence of words, just like when we talked about apophasis, that does not mean that you're not acknowledging something that isn't already there. Poetry is very much about, expressing things that we sometimes can't express through language. And so not only do we use the words by being very specific in our word choice, but we also use our form. So broken lines, remixes, like what we see happening in this poem, right? Side A, just like how Karen was noting, reads in one way, and side B does have that sort of blackout poetry effect. But it's not necessarily blackout poetry. What it is that some of the words are being reused in a different order, right? And so that different order creates actually a different meaning to the lines themselves. Si gustan, puedo leerles de nuevo el poema, para que vean exactamente cómo es que está sucediendo esta técnica que está usando Desiree Bailey. So we're going to read through it one more time, this time no pauses. And hopefully you'll be able to get a different sense of what the poem is saying. So I'll go ahead and read it for you. Women in Dub. I'm going to put on an iron shirt and chase the devil out of the earth. Lee, Scratch Perry, and Max Romeo. Side A. The devil I see is the one I see and nail out of fears, out of cycles of wound, dread calcifying into prophecy. I put on an iron shirt to face it, chase it, but the cops still piss drunk with power. I put on an iron shirt, but the men on the street surveil the nipple. Been hounding my punani since before I spilled my first blood. What a menace of a body. I hurl blame to the husk. Is the devil real or is it of my fantastical making? The answer is not the matter. The fact of paranoia be the true violence, warfare, the very presence of the question. I want to peer inward, to take a good look at the sound system. My heartbeat echoing out of my folkloric thirst, my desperate belief in other realities. A B-side where I'm abolished from emotional labor, aka Black woman's burden. Free to surrender to my own madness, to sink down into the dub of it, stripped of my first voice, reverbing outside the pain of a body. Side B, stripped of my first voice. Down in the dub, cop hounds my blood, into paranoia, a black reality. Cycles spilled, power husked, emotional woman I iron, real street, folkloric and mad, true. Take a good look at the devil, peer into the dread. Men surrender to wound, drunk, calcified, but I, fantastic. Chasing echoes, nailed to system, free in sound, I, a fact, answer of my own making. Now in Spanish for you. Mujer en Du. Le voy a poner una camisa de fierro y sacar el diablo de la tierra. Lee Scratch Perry y Max Romeo. Lado A. El diablo que veo es el que vi y saco con clavos de los temores. Fuera de ciclos de heridas. El pavor calcificándose en profecía. Me pongo una camisa de fierro para enfrentarlo y perseguirlo, pero el poli sigue borracho con poder. Me pongo una camisa de fierro, pero los hombres en la calle vigilan el pezón, acosando mi punani desde antes que derramé mi primera sangre. ¡Qué amenaza de cuerpo! Lanzo culpa a la cáscara. ¿Será de verdad del diablo o será de mi obra fantástica? La respuesta no es la cosa. El hecho de paranoia es la verdadera violencia. Guerra, la presencia actual de la pregunta. Quiero mirar hacia adentro, tomar un buen vistazo al sistema de sonido. El latido de mi corazón resonando fuera de mi sed folclórico, mi creencia desesperada en las realidades alternativas. Un lado B donde soy abolida del labor emocional, alias la carga de la mujer negra, libre para rendirme a mi propia locura, para hundirme dentro de su du, despojada de mi primera voz, reverberando afuera del dolor de un cuerpo. Lado B. Despojada de mi primera voz. Abajo en el dub, poli acosando mi sangre. hacia el paranoia, una realidad negra, ciclos derramados, poder descascarillada. Yo mujer emocional, yo fierro, calle verdadera, folclórico y loca, de verdadera. Toma un buen vistazo al diablo, mira hacia adentro del pavor. Hombres se rinden a la herida, borracho, calcificado, pero yo, fantástico, persiguiendo ecos, clavado al sistema, libre en sonido, yo, un hecho, respuesta de mi propia voz. Abraham, you said you like side A more. Why do you like side A more?
It's more clear as a message. It's more clear and it follows more smoothly. The other one, it has too much pauses for my liking. On this one specific, but that's it.
Do you think that there are two contrasting messages though between side A and side B?
Not really that much. You can still follow the same narrative, but you follow it more because you read the first side before you go to the second side. But let's say if it was just the side B, you read it by itself, it wouldn't be as strong without side A.
I agree with that. Caro?
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't realize this when we first read it, but yeah, so all of side B is just like all the word, it's just like a rehashing of some of the words in side A. So I just thought that was kind of cool. It's interesting how to you take you say one thing and then you take those same words and kind of twist it around. So like I personally like side B more because of that. I just feel like there's more to I don't know, I guess there's more to like interpret or just I don't know, it just goes deeper for me, this side B.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think that side B really could not exist without side A. So I think that Abraham's point about the message being a particular kind of message in side A is important. But side B, to me, feels like it's reclaiming the space. ¿Verdad? Es una reclamación del espacio que normalmente no se le da a la persona. You know, side A talks about being surveilled, talks about the harassment of women. It also talks about, people in power being power hungry and power drunk, ¿verdad? Así que el lado A es como dando un reconocimiento de que existen estructuras sistémicas que tienen racismo como su basis. ¿Verdad? I mean, it really is, I think, a message about systemic racism and also the patriarchy in side A. And we can't really have that reclaiming of the space that side B does without acknowledging, I think, the limitations that women and Black women specifically are thrusted on them. Carlos?
Yes. Now, like that, I heard it like all in as one, and just meditating on it, and then hearing from all the feedback everyone said. I just think this is like super, super, super cool and awesome that just with writing, she was able to create like a whole thing because, okay, first you have the title and it says Woman in Dove, and then you're thinking of the music, Dove music. You start with side A, and you guys mentioned you start thinking about like a record or a tape where you have to change it, side A, side B. So it starts playing, and then you were mentioning about like the yeah, definitely it is about this like systemic racism and all this, things that are kind of like putting us like a suppression and And I was looking at it this way, where it's like, oh, the paragraph is breaking up. There's spaces that shouldn't be there. But that's just because we were told in school that that's the way to write a paragraph. That's the way to write English. And all these spaces, I guess, they wouldn't be acceptable. You know, you're just skipping lines and everything, and you're just trying to fill the page. But she's breaking all this, and then on side B, it's so I just, in between all those lines, I don't know, I feel like there's like that rhythm and there's like music in between that it's kind of like liberating. At least personally, like music is just kind of like very liberating. And then especially you start thinking more of the dub kind of like rhythm, because when she mentions the true, when she says like true, you know, like that's like the dub thing, you know, like the you know. So it creates like this, like just with words and this letter, it kind of like brings it to life, and it brings it to like a real life record or tape. And it's, I don't know, I just thought it was just now like meditating hearing what you guys said. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm glad that you feel that way, because, you know, I really wanted to make sure that this week I talked about how, you know, our voice takes up space, right? And again, you know, the theme of our current series is our voice, our place. And I think that it's really important, especially with everything that's happening in the world. And, you know, us, even though we're socially isolated, you know, we can't be in a class together, you know, we're still able to connect this way through our voice, right? Through us actually speaking with each other in live. But then also thinking about, you know, everything that's happening with the protests and, you know, all the social injustices that are finally being kind of acknowledged on a very serious level. You know, there is that opportunity for our voice to go beyond just what's written on the page, right? Performance of poetry and you sharing your poetry is part of taking up this space. No siempre nos dan el lugar para practicar nuestra poesía. You know, we're not always the first people to be published when it comes to, you know, writing about these kinds of things, but we still are here. We're still writing, and we are going to publish your work, and we are going to, you know, share it with the larger world. And so we are reclaiming a space that is rightfully ours. And I think that, you know, this poem is a really good example of different ways in which you can do that on the page, because let's be real, we're not necessarily given tomorrow. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. A person one day could pick up this particular issue of Conchas y Café, and they'll be able to understand your voice by the way that all of you are writing. But then also, you know, you have the opportunity on the paper when it's printed to really take up space, you know, and to claim a space that normally would not be given to you. You know, I know that for me, it took me a really long time to feel confident enough to even just simply submit work to be published. You know, it wasn't something that I said, oh, you know, I'm 16 years old, I'm going to be published tomorrow. Like, no, I felt really self-conscious about that. It took me another like 5-6 years before I was finally comfortable with just even entering the open mic, you know, let alone going and actually sending work to be published. No. Hey, Abraham, you're already claiming 20 pages? Cálmate, hermano, cálmate. But you know, I think that this is a really good poem for us to sort of see, you know, different techniques that you can use to really take up pages, because ultimately it does matter, right? History books, you know, might be given this time in history like 1-2 paragraphs, right? But we have history books that spend full chapters on the Revolutionary War. You know, yes, that was an important war for the United States, but, you know, the civil rights movement is more than just like one page. You know, the women's suffrage movement is more than just 2 paragraphs. You know, it's a movement that it's still, you know, happening to this day, right? So having your voice in print taking up as much space as it can take up, that's really important. That's really valuable. And I want to make sure that that comes across with this technique. So I did give it a name earlier, and I want to make sure that you all know exactly what the technique is called. And those of you that have been part of Conchas y Café for a while have heard me talk about this before, but it's Sejura, right? So Sejura, it's an old term. Greek and Latin poetry have used it since those times, but this is the more modern definition of it. So Sejura is usually a rhetorical break in the flow of sound in the middle of a line of verse. Y en español se pronuncia igual, Caesura, y es típicamente una pausa retórica del flujo de sonido en medio de una línea de verso. So we have a very clear example here, I think, of Sejura. Sejura is a technique that you can sometimes use like what they call a hash mark, right? So the little slash line that you see on a page, that could be read as a Sejura. It can also be just extra spaces, like in how side A uses the extra spaces between words to denote a pause. Sejura can also kind of be the way in which side B, for example, uses those extra long spaces in between the lines. If you're going to name your dog Sejura, Abraham, that's a good idea. But Sejura is that technique, right? It's that technique of creating space with blank space, ultimately. So you can also think of it in performance as a very deliberate pause. Right? So as you're performing your poetry, or as you're writing your poetry with performance in mind, you may want to, in the middle of a line, use a few spaces, 5, 10 spaces. You might want to use spaces in between your stanzas, 1, 2, 3 line breaks to actually create that extended pause between your stanzas. So it's a technique that poets have used for a very long time, and it's a very dramatic technique. So guess what your writing prompt is for this week? I'm going to present it back up on the screen here, unless if anybody has any questions or anything. But let me at least show you the writing prompt before we take questions or anything like that. So esta semana, hablando de Caesura, su tema de escritura es: quiero que dejen que su voz y presentación tome lugar en la página. Use Caesura para dominar el lugar que normalmente no se le da a su cuerpo. Kind of clarify or translate for you. Let your voice and performance take up space on the page. Use Sejura to own the space your body is not often given. So basically, use Sejura and craft a message that you feel is saying something that you normally don't get a chance to say. Take up space. Take up that space that you're normally not given. This is a very important time in our history, and I think that you have more than enough right to take up the space that you feel you need. You can speak on any topic that you want. You can use Sejura to tell the story that you want to tell. Because remember, this is about you and your stories, right? Your message. I want to give it that platform. So, does anybody have any questions or any comments related to Sejura, the use of Sejura, or anything like that?
Is there such a thing as too much Sejura?
I think that is really going to depend on the poem, right? Because remember, Sejura is a pause. It's a very deliberate pause. So if the pause feels like it's too long and the person might sort of lose the meaning of your line, that could potentially be too much Caesura. Tina is asking whether you have to do a side B type of piece. If you want to do a remix of your poem, feel free to do that. Remember, you can always use that movement structure, right? Where you have a side A or movement one. You can always play around with it and have a movement B that sets it up the same way, right?
Luis.
Yes. Oh, you muted yourself. There you go.
Are they both considered as Sejura?
Yeah, both side A and side B in this poem do use Sejura.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's different examples there of how it's executed.
Sejura.
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 Yeah, like seizure, but Sejura. Yeah. Miss Luce is asking in the chat if blackout poetry would work. Yeah, blackout poetry is kind of like a form of Sejura. But do keep in mind that blackout poetry is taking previously written poetry and blacking out words that will then create a new poem. So it's not exactly blackout poetry, but kind of like what Tina was asking, you can do a poem or like a movement A or side A and then remix it. So you're taking out words and reusing the same words. That might be a technique you may want to try. Another question, Tina? No.
Oh, my mic is on. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So, any other questions? Any last comments? No?
When is this poetry and cooking class starting?
We'll have to discuss that. Who knows? Maybe the next issue.
Okay.
No promises. San Juanita, did you have a question?
Yeah, it can be English or Spanish, right?
Como quiera.
And
this is your voice, so you can write in English, Spanish, Thai, French, whatever language you choose.
But let me ask you a question. That last week is the first time that when I found out that you guys are doing it online, and my question is this: what are we doing with whatever we are writing? Was I supposed to send it to you?
You can use Google Classroom to upload it and send it to me for feedback. Yes.
Yeah, because what I would like to do, and I don't know if you're gonna ever get to do this. Like, what about editing and doing all that? Because I know that my poem can use a lot of editing. Because whatever I wrote last week. However, I was thinking of doing it in English, but for some reason my ideas came in Spanish, and I kept on writing in Spanish. But it was funny. I was really thinking in English,
Yeah.
But I guess I don't know, it just took Spanish, Yeah. But I wrote it, but I didn't submit it anywhere. Or I didn't give it to you, or I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, obviously write in whatever comes out. For me, sometimes if I'm feeling a particular way, or the poem's subject is a particular way, it'll come out in Spanish. More often than not, when I'm feeling angry or upset, or I'm trying to write about injustice, it'll come out in English, because for me, English is an angry language. But write in whatever language comes naturally to you. As far as turning in your work, you can turn it in, like I said, using Google Classroom. When I upload the handouts and the video on Google Classroom after the lesson, I do it as an assignment. And so if you go to the assignment, you'll see on the, I believe it's the right-hand corner, a little button that says turn in, or something like that.
Okay.
So there you have the option of either uploading it as a PDF, a Google Doc, as a Word document, or you can create it in Google Docs, and then it'll automatically send it to me once you hit turn in.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And this is for everyone, I'll try to get the feedback to you before the week is out, or at least, just before the next lesson. So, yeah, excellent question, though, San Juanita. Thank you for bringing that up. ¿Alguien más? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Comentario? No? All right. Well, I hope y'all have fun making a Sejura salad, as Caro suggested. Enjoy your guys' dinner. I know I'm about to go have dinner. So hopefully, San Juanita?
Can you pronounce that word again? Because you said it one way. How did you?
Sejura.
Sejura.
Yeah. So in English, it's Sejura. In Spanish, it would be Caesura.
Caesura.
Caesura. Como César.
Sí, César. Okay.
Yeah. Caesura.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So, guess that'll be a night for us. Everybody, have a good one. I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.